Well, good morning and welcome everyone, wherever you may be in the world. I'm David Bell, BSI's Director of Standards Policy, and this is our first ever BSI Standards e-conference. So we had planned today to be in Westminster Central Hall in London for our regular spring conference. Instead, like all of you, we're socially distancing, and here we are with our first e-conference. The response to moving the conference online has been excellent. More than 1,000 of you have registered to participate today, which is really fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate the challenges that you're all facing. We hope you're safe and well. On behalf of BSI, I'd like to pay tribute to everyone who's working hard to keep us all safe during these times. BSI is proud to be working closely with government and others in the UK and overseas to support the response to COVID-19. Along with standards bodies around the world, we've made available many of the key standards to support the manufacture and use of PPE and medical equipment. We're also helping organisations to use key standards. We ran a series of webinars on organisational resilience, business continuity and risk management. And if you were unable to join them live, they are available to download from the BSI website or free of charge, of course. And we've added a special focus session this afternoon in part 2 of this event on organisational resilience. As well as the BSI website, you can follow the BSI National Standards Body page on LinkedIn to receive regular updates about what BSI is doing to support the COVID crisis. Now, our spring conference is the event where we take the opportunity to focus on our young professionals, and we try to explore topics which may push us to think differently about the role standards can play in solving new and complex technical, economic and social challenges, and our speakers today were chosen with this in mind. Our first is joining us to talk about his journey as a young entrepreneur and the role of standards in the success of his business. And our second is exposing some of the gaps and problems in women's healthcare, which could be solved with new and emerging technologies, and the role that standards can play to support that. We really want to thank all of our speakers and panelists for taking this journey with us, and in some cases taking a crash course and getting the most out of Zoom. I think we've all been on those recently. And thank you to our exhibitors who are taking the plunge with us as well and trying to do some virtual networking. Hopefully you've found the time already to interact with them in our knowledge marketplace this morning. So we hope you'll have a great experience today, and there's no doubt that we've got some fantastic speakers and some great content. This is a first for BSI to do such a major conference online for our standards conference. So we ask you for your understanding if things are not quite as slick as you've grown to expect from our face-to-face events. We will send you a feedback form after the event, and your feedback will be extremely useful in helping us to improve our virtual conference delivery. So some tips and reminders to help you get the most out of today. In order to move from room to room and from session to session, you'll need to use the hyperlinks on the agenda that you were sent. So please keep that document open and feel free to move around at will between the different sessions. The plenary session where you are now will be live all day, and there will be a tech support officer here. So if you have any problems, please go back to that session using the link and you can chat to a tech support officer. Now, because of the number of participants, your video is off and your mic has been muted. The exceptions are in the knowledge marketplace meetings where you can chat and see freely the exhibitors as they show you around their marketplace. The Q&A and chat functions can be used to ask questions. So speakers or hosts for each session will let you know which is being used. I can tell you that for this session, the plenary, we'll be using the Q&A function. So if you have any questions for our keynote speakers, you should put them there, and you can access the Q&A through the menu bar at the bottom of your screen. Just to let you know, we will be recording the sessions for future playback. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker of the day. Now, I'm sure you've read the bios of the speakers that's on the event website, so I'll keep it brief. Our first speaker is an award-winning serial social entrepreneur, having founded a number of ventures over the years, and is currently the chief toaster at Toast Ale, which brews what they describe as planet-saving beer using unsold loaves from bakeries, with all profits going to Feedback, a charity that fights food waste. So a very warm welcome to Rob Wilson. Rob, over to you.
Thanks, David. Really appreciate the generous introduction. And yeah, morning to everyone remotely. Cheers. And it's a little bit too early to all collectively raise a toast. But yeah, I'm Rob Wilson, Chief Toaster at Toast Ale, and I will be chatting through yeah, my business journey. I'll try and be positive about standards. As an entrepreneur, at times I probably have felt that standards are a bureaucratic hurdle for us to overcome, rather than something to celebrate. But I will make sure that I pull out the positives that I definitely have seen as a business owner. Yeah, I'll share my story, and really keen to engage in as much dialogue as possible. I'm not going to have slides. I thought that we'd try and keep this as informal and interactive as Zoom will possibly allow. So yeah, our whole journey at Toast, basically, we're on a mission to prove the alternative to food waste is delicious and pint-sized. So we brew our planet-saving beer using yesterday's bread that would otherwise have gone to waste. So this is fresh surplus bread, but bread that would have otherwise gone to waste. And we pour 100% of our profits into charities, environmental charities fighting food waste. We obviously think we're the best thing since you know what. And the whole journey started around more than 4 years ago. I liked my introduction as a young entrepreneur. I'll definitely take that. I'm not sure it's entirely justified. But yeah, our whole journey for Toast began about 4 years ago. It was a friend's idea. So it was a friend called Tristram Stewart. Tristram is a kind of a campaigner, author, a real sort of advocate for fighting food waste. So he kind of wrote the book on food waste. He's given the TED talk on food waste, and has really put a spotlight on an issue where previously I think we considered food was going to waste, people were going hungry in the world, and that it was quite a binary issue in that respect. Of course, that is an issue, but what Tristram had put a spotlight on was the fact that food waste actually is a massive environmental issue. 1/3 of the food that we produce in the world goes to waste. It's over 1 billion tons of perfectly good fresh food every single year going to waste. And the food industry has by far the biggest impact on the environment. So if you were to include all of the impact of deforestation, the water usage, the transportation, the food industry has by far the biggest impact. People always associate it as the energy industry or the transportation industry. On which note, how wonderful is it to actually look up at the skies without aeroplanes at the moment? Yesterday was Earth Day, and at Toast we are a bit of a bunch of hippies, and we are able to celebrate some of what is happening at the moment. And so when Tristram and I were having a chat sort of 4 or 5 years ago, he basically made me aware that the biggest food waste of them all is the humble loaf of bread. So 44% of the bread that is baked in the UK goes to waste. Absolutely bonkers. And the origins of beer production from thousands of years ago always had surplus bread as an ingredient. So the first ever beer recipe that's been discovered, 4,000 to 5,000 years old, had bread as an ingredient. Local bakeries and local breweries would partner up. This happened for millennia. And it wasn't until the Industrial Revolution where surplus bread was actually sort of stopped being used routinely in beer production. And so Tristram kind of said, Rob, like, why don't we start up a beer company? He said, let's get wasted on waste, which, that definitely had me. And we went about building our business, Toast. And Toast really, I guess, is built on 4 core principles as a business. So for hopefully some people will have tried it. We are still a very small, growing social enterprise, struggling a hell of a lot at the moment. To give you an insight, about 70% of our business would normally be in bars and pubs and restaurants, hospitality industries, and so yeah, tough times. But hopefully some people will have tried it or picked it up. And our number one principle as a business is absolutely outstanding quality. And I guess that's where some of these standards really do come in. Like I said, as an entrepreneur at times, having started, I think I've thought that standards were this bureaucratic hurdle to overcome. I think what you realize more and more is that these standards are actually incredibly valuable for creating a framework and a structure that are to a certain extent off the shelf for us, and actually enabling us to perform as a business. So number one, our principle is outstanding high quality beers. We've won great taste awards for all of the beers that we've produced. We've won international beer competitions. And yeah, a product's got to serve its purpose. If you're looking for a delicious cold beer, it's got to be a delicious cold beer. The second, third, and fourth principles behind the business are far more mission-based. So the second thing for us is we're trying to eliminate commercial bread waste. So this statistic that 44% of the bread goes to waste, we just think is absolutely bonkers. And we've open sourced our recipe. That's now been downloaded about 80,000 times. So big commercial brewers, local regional brewers, we love it when home brewers get involved. If there's anyone watching who's interested in home brewing at the moment, you've probably got a little bit more time on your hands, or less time than ever if you're like me and you have toddlers running around. But if you do have a bit more time on your hands, then give home brewing a go. Our recipe's on the website. You can download that and have a crack. So this kind of second pillar to the business, to really try and shift the entire industry, we've taken a very open approach. We've open sourced a lot of our knowledge, a lot of our know-how. The third principle, we're really trying to raise awareness about food waste, but we're trying to do that in quite a fun, accessible way. We're not trying to be preachy and righteous and holier than thou. Ultimately, we're trying to create a more positive solution-based approach to what is a really serious issue. And then the fourth thing, perhaps one of the more funky as a business, is a commitment to donate 100% of our profits to an environmental charity called Feedback. Feedback's an amazing organization campaigning to fight food waste at a real systemic level. So they campaign for policy change. They're campaigning around certain standards when it comes to waste. They are trying to change consumer behavior. So a lot of the things that people will now be familiar with around wonky and ugly fruits and vegetables, they were campaigning around 10, 15 years ago to try and bring to the fore. But what they do isn't, I suppose, particularly sexy work, for want of a better description. And so our commitment to provide them with a regular income stream is really important, because they are very much speaking truth to power. They're speaking truth to us as consumers, to government, to policymakers, to industry. And so our commitment, whether it's 100% of profits, we've also said it would be 1% of revenue, whatever's higher. Sadly, at the moment, 1% of revenue is higher than our profits. But yeah, we've been really proud to have donated over £35,000 to Feedback now since we started. And so that's really the sort of, I guess, basis upon which we built the business, and they really underpin a lot of the decisions that we make. We're a certified B Corporation as well. I think that's a really fantastic certification process to go through. For us, so if you're not familiar with B Corp, it's a process that underpins, I guess, businesses that put people, profit, and planet all in equal measure. So again, as well as these four values that we hold as a business. These three principles, where it comes to every decision we make, will put in equal measure the people in the business, the culture, our environmental impact, our supply chain, as well as the money that we're making and the business model. And that's been a fantastic process to go through. Since we started 4 years ago, the business has grown very rapidly. So we're now available nationally in little known shops like Tesco's and Waitrose and Co-op and Ocado. Really proud to have that kind of national distribution. Thank goodness we do at the moment. Probably a funny insight that I have as an owner of a beer company at this present time is that Brits are definitely drinking their way through this crisis. The sales in the retail sector are definitely going through the roof. Probably a little bit alarming. We do say that bread shouldn't be wasted, and neither should you. So drink responsibly. But yeah, at the moment, sales are certainly soaring in the retail environment. And so we've grown rapidly, probably about over 100% at times year on year, our growth rate, so more than doubling every year. We've expanded internationally quite quickly as well, and that's been quite interesting from a standards perspective. So where you would imagine the alcohol industry to be quite heavily regulated, you realize that in the UK, actually, we're a very unregulated industry, and in general, I would say a very unregulated environment for business. There's not actually a lot of red tape. There are some fantastic standards and guidelines to adhere to, but relatively good, I would say, at balancing that to not then have government red tape in the way. And I say that as quite a left-leaning individual. So we launched in America, for example, 3 years ago. We launched on the 4th of July, which we thought was hilarious as a British business, launching on the 4th of July, not saying we're back. The Americans didn't find it quite as funny as we did. But when having launched in the US is an incredibly regulated industry. So everything from the kind of the label on your bottle, you need to get approved from a government body. The recipe needs approval. The distribution model is completely different. You can't just send beer in the post. So at the moment, again, what's keeping our business afloat are some of our online sales. That's just not possible in the US. It's really interesting to see these different standards that exist around the world, and that the alcohol industry in the UK is actually at one quite extreme end of a spectrum at being very unregulated. And so, yeah, we've grown rapidly in the UK. We've grown a lot internationally. So we expanded to South Africa, Brazil, Iceland. That wasn't the most strategic decision I ever made. We probably should have just gone big in like Milton Keynes, where it's got a higher population than Iceland. But we've expanded internationally quite quickly, and we've collaborated with breweries all around the world. We've taken a very collaborative approach to try and achieve our impact. And delighted to say that on the whole, things have gone extremely well. To explain some of our process a little bit more, so we partner primarily with the sandwich industry. So the end slice of a loaf of bread, the heel of a loaf, is surplus to requirements in the sandwich industry. We in the UK are freaking addicted to our sandwiches, our pre-packed sandwiches that we buy in a shop, less so at the moment. And so thankfully, there's a little less waste happening at the moment. But ordinarily, when we're buying those sandwiches, you obviously never have the crust on a loaf of bread on those sandwiches. All of those crusts are just picked off the production line and end up going to waste. At best, they are channeled off for anaerobic digestion, which means they're turned into power. or it goes to animal feed. But ultimately, that is a lot of waste. To create power, you don't need to bake a loaf of bread. To feed a cow, you don't need to bake a loaf of bread. And so it's a very wasteful process still. It should really be for human consumption. And so we're able to take those slices. Often people say the crust is the best bit, but we're able to take those end slices, the crusts. We then process that into a dried breadcrumb that we then brew with, and it acts very much the same as malted barley. We have to follow some careful standards in moving what is described as sort of a surplus ingredient, to make sure that it is always treated as surplus rather than waste. There's quite an important technical difference when something crosses that line from being sort of a surplus to requirements, but still going to be used elsewhere, which obviously we're doing, to being classified as waste. There's quite a different regulation. And so we have to adhere to very careful food safety standards. Obviously, a lot of allergen controls have to be put in place when we're moving these ingredients, and we're working with facilities like a sandwich manufacturer. Again, a lot of allergen controls to be in place to make sure that our beer is as allergen free, obviously, as you want it to be. And so we then sort of move to the brewery. We have our own head brewers, so we develop all of our own recipes, but we then partner with a brewery in Sussex called Hepworth, where we brew all of the beers. We're bottling, canning, kegging that beer and distributing it all across the country. And then before I sort of wrap up, just to share, because I'd love to open it up to plenty of questions today. Before I wrap up, just to share sort of a recent example, something we're really proud of. So as a business, it has been quite a challenging time, of course. We, as a B Corp and as a mission-driven business, thought first and foremost, how can we try and help? And our partner charity Feedback has launched some amazing feeding programs. It's something that we've seen a lot of, obviously, on the media in recent weeks, which is fantastic to see. A lot of community action going into making sure that those in need are receiving at least the food that they need. And so Feedback has launched a whole series of community feeding programs. And what we've done is launched a campaign that we call the meal deal. And for every beer that we're selling on our website, we're obviously not taking any profits from, and we're actually channeling the proceeds from those sales to Feedback for a feeding program. And so since we launched this initiative, we've managed to provide enough funding for 15,000 meals, the majority of which are for a Liverpool-based project. And then there's a London, a Kent, and a Sussex-based community projects as well that it's supporting. So yeah, really proud to see that. And I think what's been amazing is seeing so many other businesses in this time where you would imagine the sort of first and foremost to sort of look inwards and look after oneself. I think the businesses that are really going to thrive at this time are the ones that are actually outward looking and seeing how they can help. This is obviously a challenging time, but it's going to be, let's hope, a relatively short-lived challenge that will last several months. But the businesses that I think during those months that think first and foremost about the community around them will be the ones that I hope show where their values really stand, and I hope put them in good stead going forward. So yeah, that's a little bit of an introduction to us at Toast and what we are up to. Would love to take some questions and raise a toast collectively if you can get your hands on any, and save the world. Cheers.
Rob, excellent. Thank you so much. You've got us thinking far too early in the morning about beer, but it was a great presentation. I'm not surprised that we've got a lot of questions, and you've got some new customers as well. So congratulations, you've done a good sales job at the same time. So that's good news. I think I must start with the right at the beginning, the bureaucratic hurdle point. We can't let that one drop. That's, in fact, we did have one of the questions. Let me answer this one live, so hopefully you can see it in the answered live points. But it says, if Robert viewed standards as bureaucratic to be overcome and only came to realise their value through the process, why did he decide to go for them? So what was the drive? Was it customers that were driving you towards standards? Was it your supply chain? What was it?
Actually, more based on advice from, so we've got an amazing board of non-execs who volunteer their time for us. Given our values, normally you'd have to pay non-execs an arm and a leg. We're very lucky to have a really stellar board. And my chair of the board is the founder of a baby food company called Ella's Kitchen. He's Paul Lindley, a really phenomenal British entrepreneur. And I remember one conversation in particular where, talking about some of these kind of standards and things, it's just saying, like, Rob, what you need to make sure of is you never have something like a where you're going to have to sort of pull your stock back from the shelves of a supermarket chain because some kind of standard hasn't actually been met. The big retailers as well, as soon as we started dealing with them, there are certain standards that they will absolutely require you to produce. Something called HCAP, which is sort of HACCP, sort of model for breweries to be following for food safety, things like that, that you have to have in place as you grow a little bit bigger and sort of move from being a very small cottage industry to actually dealing with bigger retailers. And actually just realizing some of the doors that these standards can open because of the requirements from bigger industry, as well as the fact that the workload that it will prevent later on by actually just dealing with your standards at the moment.
Wow. A question Adrian Smith asked about whether there was any move to lobby governments to force supermarkets to donate end of best before period food and attempt to remove waste from all food outlets. Are you involved in any of that?
So our partner charity feedback, I love someone's comment, by the way, that I said stellar board. Yeah, good. That wasn't a deliberate pun. And thank goodness our board is not the stellar board. I shouldn't think there'd be quite the same values right now. And so we are indirectly. So I think what's important for us is, and what's quite funny is that our profits go to feedback. Feedback are lobbying the big retailers. One of our biggest customers, we're very proud of and have been an amazing partner, are Waitrose. Mm-hmm. And we actually received a prize from them a couple of years ago as one of the sort of suppliers of the year to Waitrose, and that's certainly not because we are making the most money for them. We're not, obviously, Persil or something, but we given our values, but all the money that we're sending to feedback, they're then lobbying the big industry, and out of nowhere, feedback produced a report where they were naming and shaming the worst culprits when it came to waste, who weren't actually sort of taking it upon themselves to support local feeding programs, and top of the list was Waitrose. And so the kind of headaches that we were concerned that might give us. But I think what's wonderful is the openness and the transparency that we treat this whole thing. And I think the retailers quite enjoy being held to account in this way. One of our first big customers was Tesco's, and Tesco's, ordinarily you would imagine to come under criticism as the biggest, and so you'd assume probably the worst. I think that's probably the typical consumer assumption, that they might be one of the worst offenders. Tesco's have actually been one of the absolute pioneers on creating standards to avoid waste. They've targeted all of their staff on waste reductions. And so also, just to absolutely emphasize, which is important to make clear, we would never ever take any bread from a supply chain that could otherwise go to feeding those in need. An absolute kind of, I guess, disastrous part of the bread food system is that so much goes to waste, that food charities all over the country, it's a bit of an embarrassment for the industry. Food charities all over the country are turning bread away because just so much of it goes to waste. It's very cheap to make, very high profit margins, and it's then churned out in sort of mass volumes.
There's a few questions coming about your process and about your ingredients. I'll try and take them all together if I can. So David Osborne's asked about, does it matter if the bread's slightly mouldy, and can you use flour and or potatoes in the mix? And Gordon Farquharson said, what about contamination with microorganisms or chemical contaminants in the raw material? And also, who sets the standards for your raw material quality?
So when it comes, the first one around mold, so I don't want to confuse anyone. Technically, from a brewing perspective, it wouldn't actually matter too much. We do not have any mold on the bread that we use. We don't allow that. We're very careful with our supply chain to avoid that. Part of the reason for why we quite quickly crumb and dry the bread is to avoid that from happening, and then have to perform some lab tests with folks like Camden, and also we partner with the National Bakery School, where we also have done some lab tests on the breadcrumb that we're using. And so, yeah, from a technical brewing perspective, it actually wouldn't matter. There's no way you would be able to tell that some slices of moldy bread went in there, but we do not do that. And then, yeah, you can use other things. We don't, but you could. So a lot of brewers you can use potatoes. Potatoes have been used. And I think what's also interesting is that the origins of waste or alcohol rather have always come from the sort of food waste industry. So I gave the example of bread and beer, but for a lot of the spirits in the world, they've also come from fruits and vegetables that would have otherwise gone to waste. And it doesn't matter how ugly or wonky your potato is, it could still make a vodka and things like that. So certainly potatoes can be used for beer. They have been used for beer. It's not the most delicious, but it can be done. Flour can be used as well as a very cheap ingredient in beer production. Sometimes breweries will use what you call an adjunct, and so we replace 1/3 of the malted barley in our brewing process with yesterday's bread. We've gone as high as 50%. We have to start adding enzymes, so something called amylase, which is going to be breaking down the starches in the bread. They're naturally released from malted barley. They're not present in the bread, and so if you were to add too much bread, you're going to have to artificially add some enzymes. That's fine. That doesn't actually have to be declared on a beer label. That's not a standard that's required. We rather not do that at the moment. We'd rather keep that. But it's a delicate balance, really, to be trying to tackle as much waste as possible, to also trying to stay relatively sort of pure to certain I guess brewing traditions or standards. In terms of who certifies the standards or the microorganisms, I actually don't know the answer to the sort of microorganisms and the chemical question that was asked. I would need our head brewer to step in, so I'd normally be passing it on to him. So apologies that I can't give a solid answer.
Don't worry. We've got loads more. I'll try and group them up. There was a few questions that came in around exporting. Now, before we spend a lot of time talking about COVID, in BSI, we spend a lot of time talking about standards and trade. And it was interesting your comments there about the US market and the regulations there, which is something that we certainly see in particular for a potential US trade deal. So a few questions. Mark Barsby, Colin McCarrick asked about whether you brew locally, or whether you brew in this country and export, or whether you brew locally around the world. And then a little bit, Anne Hayes has asked about whether there are challenges in exporting regulations and whether local international standards have helped you at all to get onto other markets.
Yeah, so we we brew locally in each market, and that has been a headache in itself as well. I don't know what, we've never tried exporting. So the idea of exporting a glass bottle full of liquid all over the world as an environmental business is just ridiculous. It's, that is so wasteful. To be honest, I'm not particularly pro export in that respect as an environmentalist, because you definitely can bring things as local as possible. One of the reasons we open sourced our homebrew recipe is that very genuinely and authentically, we would love people to go and brew their own beer at home. That would be the most sustainable way to do this. We know it's not realistic that everyone will do that, which is why we're very proud to have our consumer good product. But also, as an environmentalist, it's to a certain extent an oxymoron to have a sustainable consumer good. There is a real irony and contradiction even within that. So it's a real challenge we have as a business. But when it came to export, we were absolutely clear. We would not export our product. We would set up local collaborative partnerships around the world in order to brew the beer locally. But those partnerships and collaborations create real challenges. You don't get an economy of scale, but you gain from the fact that if you're partnering with someone locally, they know their market, they know the standards that are required, and so you're able to ultimately harness that expertise and knowledge rather than us in the UK having to figure it all out for ourselves.
Right. So thank you so much to everybody who's put questions on. We've got far too many to answer individually, but maybe we'll just take two final groups. One is around the health issues around alcohol and whether you're looking at a low alcohol version, or whether that's in your mind. And there's even a question about gluten-free. Is that possible? I know there's gluten-free beer, but is it even possible when you're using bread? And then the final set of questions around the current issues of COVID and your supply chain. What's the impact on your supply chain of what we're seeing at the moment?
Yeah, so maybe with the supply chain one, where we do have so our brewer is able to operate where we partner with this brewery in Sussex. We don't own that brewery. They're amazing independent brewery. We would normally be doing what you call gypsy brewing, which is where our head brewer goes to their brewery to brew the beer on their site. Our head brewer isn't allowed at the moment onto their site. So they are brewing the beer on our behalf. But our normal quality controls that we would be, absolutely in charge of because our head brewer is there, is a potential challenge for us at the moment, to not be there brewing our beer. Now, they've brewed it with our head brewer so many times that I completely trust that process. But that's just one small element of getting comfortable with the fact that we're letting go a little bit of control. And a good problem to have, given our principles, is that the supply of the surplus is a bit more of a challenge. The food to go industry is really hurting at the moment. Obviously, we're not all commuting and consuming in the same way that we were just a few weeks ago, and so we're not buying those pre-packed sandwiches in Boots and Tesco's on the high street, and so these big sandwich companies are producing far less waste. We're also not able to get into the National Bakery School, which is where we've been partnering with to process a lot of the surplus in their food safe lab environments, and not having access to that facility is a real challenge for us at the moment. So we built up a stockpile of surplus crumb, because that will last several weeks, but only several weeks at the moment. And so we're looking to see how we can sort of develop new parts of the supply chain. And then the first part of your question, remind me?
It's about 0% alcohol or gluten-free?
Yeah, so we it's a tricky one. So rather than producing our own 0% alcohol at the moment, we would recommend other fantastic social enterprise soft drinks companies like Lemonade or Karma. There's some great drinks products out there that are also mission driven and social enterprises. It's a challenge. So we are using the carbohydrates, the starches from the bread, to convert into alcohols. And if you were to create a zero alcohol beer, you're either putting less sugars, less starches into that beer in the first place. So in our case, that would mean less bread going into the brew, which kind of defeats the point of what we're trying to do. The more bread, the more sugars, and ironically, the higher the alcohol content, therefore, you would actually get more waste sort of processing, or you have to produce it and then take the alcohol out of that product, which is quite an intensive process. You can then use that alcohol for things like cleaning products. We've seen that obviously booming over the last few weeks. Something obviously we've been familiar with, everyone in the alcohol industry familiar with for years, things like hand sanitizer, but all our cleaning products have alcohol in them. And so, or ethanol. And so the idea that we would produce a zero alcohol or a very low alcohol beer with bread is a challenge for us. You would normally use quite specialist malts that are still full of body and character, but lower in sugars. We can look to see if there's any surplus bread that might mirror those characteristics. Gluten-free, again, you can do. It's pretty simple. You would add an enzyme that would take out much of the gluten. You would brew it exactly the same. You wouldn't need to use gluten-free bread. But we, so far, more from a marketing and communications perspective, have felt like it would be too baffling and confusing for people to have a beer brewed primarily with surplus bread that was gluten-free. Would, one, be confusing, and also from a desirability perspective, create some challenges when you're describing it as gluten-free. We are looking at whether we should just produce a very small range of gluten-free, just so that we have that as a solution for anyone that requires a gluten-free product rather than desires, I suppose, a gluten-free product.
Rob, terrific. Thank you so much. There's lots of questions coming in about B Corp, which I know is a bit of a controversial subject in the standards world, about how robust it is as a standard compared to some of the others, but that's probably a question for another day, maybe over a beer sometime. And we can homebrew this as well, you said? You've got
yes, yeah,
on your website?
Yeah. Go to their website and you can download the recipe. And if you can safely get hold of some surplus, please don't go and buy bread. Let it go to waste and then brew it. You have to go to a local bakery or local supermarket and go and ask them if they have surplus. I'll allow some yellow label purchases, but that's the most I'll allow.
That's the most. Okay, you've got 10 seconds. Tell us where we can buy your product. I'll give you a free ad.
We would love it if you went to toastale.com and supported the meal deal campaign. We won't make any money, but it would support a really amazing cause. You won't need to leave your home. And so if you went to toastale.com to buy the beer right now, that would be absolutely amazing. Free delivery, and it would support a wonderful cause.
Fantastic. Well, Rob, we love the bread shouldn't be wasted and neither should you slogan. And on behalf of all the parents in the room, congratulations. If you've got a toddler, you've done a good job of pacifying them.
Thankfully, my wife, we're on the sort of, we're both holding down full-time jobs. And so this is mummy shift, daddy shift starts in about an hour.
Very good. Awesome. Toast ale in a bottle, maybe that works. I don't know. Okay, Rob, thanks so much for joining us. Thank you very much. And
cheers.
Good luck with the beer.
Thank you. Bye-bye.